Hi there, Stephen Oliver here again. I'm CEO of the National Association of Professional Martial Artists and the publisher of Martial Arts Professional Magazine and Mastering the Martial Arts Business. And I wanted to come to you today and talk about MMA. And I've been looking at and listening to some of the martial arts discussion boards, which is always a bad idea, I'm afraid, but looking at and thinking about and evaluating the industry. And famously, a few years ago, we did a cover story on a martial arts professional called Mixed Up Martial Arts. And it was my take on the state of the martial arts industry in the era of MMA back a few years ago. And I want to give you my thinking about MMA, the current MMA trends, but not from a standpoint of the sport of MMA. My particular interest and focus is on the area of teaching. And if you want to use the word coaching, that's fine. But I'm not talking about teaching and coaching fighters. I'm talking about teaching and coaching students who have broader objectives than just sport applications. So what I want to do is give you some thoughts and maybe even some history and perspective. You know, I have the good fortune not only of being kind of an historian of the martial arts and sport martial arts and the history of school operations, but also having been actively involved in the industry since 1969, but also having many friends that predate that by many years. And I want to first start with a conversation about MMA as a martial art, as opposed to MMA under the auspices of UFC and the various imitators and lesser organizations. But first, as a martial art, I truly believe that MMA is really nothing new, and in fact I believe that MMA is what I've been training in since I started when I was 9 years old in 1969. And many of us forget that Judo was the popular martial art before Jun Rhee and Ed Parker and others popularized karate and taekwondo. And what happened is, if you look at the history of many well-known famous martial artists, certainly Bill Wallace and Chuck Norris would be two that are well-known and long-standing legends in the industry. Many of them started with wrestling and or judo before they started in taekwondo or tang soo do or karate. And back in the 60s and 70s, even what's considered now to be karate tournaments or open freestyle tournaments really had an awful lot of takedowns, ground fighting, oftentimes not as much ground fighting as has evolved with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but it had an awful wide range of techniques that were allowed, and frankly it only started getting reined in because of the injuries involved. I was talking to Ed Parker in one of the tournaments that I had participated in as a brown belt, and it's famously how I really learned to fight, because I spent most of the day following Pat Worley around with a video camera and recording him as he went on to become grand champion. In his last fight, he beat a very young Ray McCallum pretty soundly, and I ended up taking those films and watching them repetitiously in my garage and mimicking Pat Worley. And so when I ended up moving to Washington, D.C., even though I had never met Pat, I was a clone of Pat. I won't say as good, but I was a clone of Pat. But going back to that is, if you look at my lineage with Jun Rhee, whose relationships were very close with Bruce Lee, many people have called Bruce Lee the original MMA martial artist, and I think that's inaccurate, because as I understand it, Judo Gene LaBelle famously had an MMA match way before Bruce Lee was even old enough to have an impact. Bruce Lee famously was very engaged in mixed martial arts from the standpoint of he had a huge library, evolved his stance from fencing, evolved his movement from boxing, learned much of his kicking from Jun Rhee, from my instructor, learned grappling. All you have to do is go back and watch Enter the Dragon or many of his other films, and you'll see a wide range of martial arts. And of course, this is in the 60s and early 70s. So next is to look at MMA as a martial art is really nothing more than what I have called for many years Americanized karate or Americanized taekwondo Then you add into the mix the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu influence, and you enhance the ground fighting and expand it from there. So from a standpoint of MMA as a martial arts, I love MMA as a martial arts. I've always done MMA as a martial arts. The cover story that we did on Mixed Up Martial Arts was not about a martial art that evolves beyond traditional Taekwondo or beyond traditional karate or beyond traditional judo. It was about the image that was being portrayed in the media of what martial arts were under the auspices of mixed martial arts. And frankly, I'm still concerned about that. I'm much happier now than I was to see the evolution. Obviously, the original UFC fight started out as no holds barred. Famously coined, John McCain phrased it as human cockfighting, as there have been more rules and more safety and more elements of control, and frankly, as the quality of the fighters has continued to elevate, I'm more and more pleased with what the image is. However, it's not the image of where I see we had come from a standpoint of families and kids, and where I view martial arts and mixed martial arts in general as I view the sport of mixed martial arts and the martial art incorporating all different styles and all different ranges and everything from ground fighting to weapons. I see those as two completely different things. Now, from a standpoint of running a school, let's talk about mixed martial arts. I get inundated with instructors by email, discussion boards, on teleconferences, and the conversations often go like this: have MMA or have UFC killed traditional schools? And to me, the answer is a resounding no. I go back to a conversation that I had, and it was, you may know of Dave Kovar and Tim Kovar. Tim and Dave and I have always been very good friends. I have the highest level of respect for the Kovars and for their organization now, which is not Kovars, it's Satori. But a conversation that Tim and I had one time was, he said, well, my brother is convinced that UFC is going to kill traditional martial arts, and that we've got to say that we are mixed martial arts in order to survive. My response to him was, well, I think you're wrong, but I've been wrong many times. Here's what I suggest. Take a highlights clip of the last 3 or 4 UFC bouts, piece them together, make it a 7-minute reel, and take your next 100 intros, put the highlights reel on, and let them watch it prior to the first intro, or maybe even after the first intro class, and then proudly say, this is what we teach, and it's obviously, as you can see from the video, very effective, and this is what our style is. Famously, he refused to experiment with that and try that. But the point is made is that I see, as a school operator, that the real issue, and it's why we as martial artists, we who love the art, and I came up under a very modernized, Americanized form of Taekwondo under Grandmaster Junri and his star student, Grandmaster Jeff Smith. But it's not about what the style is. We as martial artists confuse that what we love to do physically, and even many in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who are not actively involved in competition, confuse what they like to do physically with what it is that they should be teaching. And they miss the most important question they should be asking. The most important question isn't what should I be teaching, but it's who do I want to be teaching. And it's where so much of the cacophony about this debate within the martial arts community gets lost. Is over the years there have been a whole bunch of different trends. Everything from, I can date back to when Enter the Dragon was released. It's about the time I started martial arts. I started in 1969, so I'd been training for a little while when it had been released. And there's been this trend of the Kung Fu TV show, and then there was a while where Kali and Filipino arts were all the rage, and there's been the Taibo rage, and then there's been many things, and then it was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and went from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu independently to MMA. But there's been, and I could go on and on and on, but there's been all these different trends that have happened in the industry. And the question is, again, I'm going to say it, it's who do you want to teach, not what should you be teaching. And if you are a character development for kids and families martial arts studio based in Taekwondo or based in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or based in Judo or based in Shotokan, is now putting UFC posters up, having guys running around with 22 tattoos and Speedos and so forth, is automatically incongruent with that positioning. However, if you are teaching, let's take Mike Perella and the I Love Kickboxing organization, which I think is fabulous, but if you are focusing on adult women, let's say 35, has one baby, is trying to lose the last 20 pounds of baby fat and is looking for something cool to get in shape, that's still not the image that you want. If you are an adult, targeting adult male audience, and now there is a big audience of adult males, and I think that's a very good thing, is for many, many years you could get adult females into traditional martial arts schools, you could get you could get families into martial arts schools, you could get kids into martial arts schools. Getting a 28-year-old adult male was difficult because there wasn't the cool factor there. And many have tried to recreate that over the years. Certainly John Graydon, the founder of NAPMA, made a lot of effort for that. But UFC and MMA accomplished what many others had failed to accomplish, which was make this now a cool activity for adult males. But again, let me say it again, is as a school operator, focus on who you want to teach before you focus on what you want to teach. And if you're so enamored with the thing that you're physically training in that makes the decision for you, then take the what you want to teach and figure out who is it that really wants to learn that. So again, we know that adult women, there's a big market for adult women doing Muay Thai. There's been some very successful schools, huge schools doing that. There's schools that do more cardio kickboxing, more like Taibo, Evolved. That's been very successful, and there's some new media. Certainly things like Living Social and Groupon have been very effective for getting the women's audience. There are people who've been like I've been for many years, where my primary focus of my schools was targeting 7-year-old kids as a median age and then bringing their families in, focusing on character development for kids and families. So in the industry, if you are a kids-focused school, you don't have to now say, we're teaching adult men MMA. If you're a women's cardio school or women's fitness school or women's kickboxing school, you don't have to say, well, we also want the 28-year-old men. I believe one is that specialization isn't a bad thing. As soon as you try to be all things to all people, what happens is your image gets watered down. And again, my personal schools over the years were focused on character development for kids and families. We became very strong with that reputation, still are. We were firmly ingrained in local Boy Scout troops, Girl Scout troops, local elementary schools, local churches. It was our point of focus to work in the community at that level. Now, let's go back to the MMA trend. Over the years, I have worked very diligently to always take my learning experience outside the industry and take what I've learned outside the industry and bring it in. And through that, it's been sales trainers like Brian Tracy and Tom Hopkins, and there's a whole myriad of others. Motivational teachers like Zig Ziglar, Dennis Waitley, and more recently Tony Robbins and others. It's been marketing gurus, if you want to call it that, like John Carlton, Gary Halbert, Jay Abraham, Dan Kennedy, and you can go through a long list of those people, and I can keep going on, educational theorists and psychologists and so forth. But one of the marketing people that I really like, fairly recently deceased, was an eccentric genius. And when asked the question, he said, here's the marketing question. If you were going to sell, let's say, fast food, and you wanted to set up a restaurant and have the #1 advantage that you could have to do fast food, what would be the advantage that you want? And he often said this in a seminar format, so people would, shout out, well, I want the corner location on the busiest intersection in town, or I want to have the best burger in town, or I want to have the best tacos, or, you can go through the list, but what would be the number one advantage you would want to have? And people would answer with a variety of different things, and he would say, well, no, the number one advantage I would want to have is I would want to be given a starving crowd. In other words, I would want an awful lot of people to want what it is that I teach. And I can tell you over the years, is the starving crowd for any different niche, for the who of what we teach, has peaked and valleyed over the years. There have been times, let's say, go back to when Karate Kid 1, 2, and 3 were released, that all you had to do was be out there visible somewhere, be in the yellow pages, say the word karate and kids, and have a phone number, and you would get inundated with phone calls. When Billy Blanks was on the air constantly with the Taibo commercials, same thing. All you had to do was have kickboxing in an advertisement, whether it's in the newspaper or whether it was in the yellow pages, and you'd get inundated. We were focusing on character development for kids, and we got inundated with calls of women asking if we taught kickboxing. So there have been periods where, if you're in the kids market, frankly, you don't have to work very hard to fill the school up. And there have been times when, frankly, you have to work really hard and be creative to fill the school up. There have been times in the women's fitness market where you don't have to be creative at all to get as many as you could possibly handle. And there's been other times where you had to work fairly hard to do that. In the MMA world, we're in a time right now where it's a boom period for 18 to 28-year-old men, but there's also a boom period right now for 28 to 40-year-old men. And then if you are in a situation where you like to do, want to teach, and your who is adult men, most important, who do you want to teach, not what do you want to teach. But what is MMA? Well, MMA really is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and kickboxing, right? So we have seen right now in the adult male market a lot of schools that do some iteration of kickboxing, whether it be Muay Thai or more traditional PKA-ish type of kickboxing that I came up with. But some form of kickboxing do real well against with the adult men population, and frankly also with adult women. Then we've seen an awful lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu schools. Certainly the Gracies and the Machados are two of the famous names, but we've seen an awful lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu schools can do really well with the men's market. Now, in most cases, the schools that advertise MMA bring new students in and take them down one of two paths. Initially, they teach them Muay Thai or they teach them Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In all cases, the schools that I have seen who mostly do really well do it in a very traditional fashion. They maintain respect, they retain a proper environment, they retain rank progress, they require a reasonable level of commitment, they require the students to be properly behaved, they require proper respect in class, and so forth. So if you like the activity and if your who is adult men, there's a huge, booming, hungry market for that right now. Now, what I will say is two things about it. One is I separated that audience into two groups. Let's, as a thumbnail, say there's the 18 to 25-year-old who want to be the next Brock Lesnar or whoever the current guy is. That's the figurehead. Then there's the 28 to 40-year-old crowd, professional. Let's say they're a doctor or an attorney or a middle management somewhere who wants to do something cool, wants to train in a high level, doesn't want to just go to the gym and ride the life cycle and lift weights, but doesn't want to get choked out, doesn't want to get punched out, doesn't want to get a black eye, can't go to work tomorrow with a black eye. So there are two audiences there. Now, the who that I personally prefer for my clients, for the schools that I work with, I prefer the who of the 28 to 40. Well, the reason I prefer the who for the 28 to 40 is when you're developing an educational institution, which is what I want your school to be, is you really want people who are going to be there long term, who are going to be respectful and positive students, and you want people who, frankly, can afford to pay a reasonable tuition will continue to make the payments, will renew to higher levels, and can move up the scale. The second thing is those people really want, what I want to describe next is they really want to become better overall. They're not looking for, this is just a workout. They're looking for the mental skills that everybody believes and is true that comes with martial arts. They're looking for the emotional skills that come with the level of confidence that develops with this kind of activity. They're looking for great cardiovascular fitness. They're looking for weight loss. They're looking for flexibility and to reduce injuries. But mostly they're looking to be a better person overall and have it carry over into their career, have it develop, carry over into their family, have it carry over into their relationships. So the who is an important distinction to make. I've seen some huge schools that focus on the 18 to 28-year-old audience. I haven't yet seen any that I would consider a great martial arts environment where the net profit is what I think it should be, where the retention is where I would like to have it be, where the student outcome is where I would like it to be. I'm sure they're out there. I'm sure there are some people who have cracked that code. I haven't seen that as much. What I have seen, though, is lots of million-dollar-a-year schools who are 28 to 40, strong net profit, easy to run, simple systems, quality students, respectful students, positive martial arts environment, good retention, high level of development to black belt, and of course some of them are taking 9 or 10 years to get a black belt, but high development to high levels of skill, high level of mental outcome, and high achievement in their students, not exemplified by competitive success, but exemplified by creating really high level and quality people. Not that there's anything wrong with competitive success. The indication of the Junior Institute, one of the reasons I wanted to be involved in the 60s and 70s was we had a whole bunch of world kickboxing champions and we had 2 of the 3 world forms champions at the time. So there's nothing wrong with competitive success, but from a standpoint of running your martial arts school, the focus is on student retention, the focus is on helping them create what they want to be. Now, in the industry, I've been the silent voice behind some of the top MMA school successes in the country. And where there's sometimes some dissonance is that I teach them that it's about developing leadership, it's about developing mental skill sets, it's about developing emotional high level of success, it's about having disciplined and respectful students, and it's not just about taking them to the next UFC fight and having a few of them be competitive successes. The schools that follow my advice end up with simple to operate school, simple to operate systems. They end up with a long-term student retention, and they end up with a high level of student quality long-term and with very dedicated and sincere students. So I want you to think about those things, but again, as a school operator and as somebody who helps other school operators, the missing question in most of these discussions is who rather than what. You can be extremely successful as a traditional Taekwondo instructor. You can be extremely successful as a traditional Shotokan instructor. You can be extremely successful as a kickboxing instructor, as an MMA instructor, as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor. But first decide who you want to teach, and then decide what it is you want to teach, and make those two mesh appropriately. So it's very important to figure out the who as well as the what, and mesh those in your school so that it's appropriate. Anyway, I want you to think about those things. We'll talk more about MMA and how it's evolving, and if you want to be in that niche, how to focus on that. I will tell you there's an unlimited amount of traffic right now online. You can get as many new intro students as you want from online sources, but that doesn't mean you should. Doesn't mean that should be your only pillar. Something I stole many years from Jay Abraham was called the Parthenon, is if you have only one pillar, which is, let's say, pay-per-click and search engine optimization online, that's a bad place to be. That's like us many years ago in the kids market. If you just relied on the Yellow Pages, one day that stopped working and you were in bad shape. What you should have is you should have 20 different feeders for your adult MMA school. I'll be teaching what those are as we come along, and then I'm also going to be spending a lot of time on what the young guns in the industry are and what they're doing most effectively with technology and with student service and so forth. Again, in that space is this is a online intensive right now, doesn't mean that should be your only source. We're going to be teaching you how to do the online, but we're also going to be teaching you a lot of other elements of your Parthenon to make sure you have a solid, stable business long term. Anyway, thank you for listening. I appreciate you joining me, and we'll be talking again soon. Thank you.